It's a real pleasure to welcome back to the program Mehdi Hasan. He is the host of the Mehdi Hasan Show on MSNBC and Peacock. He is the author now of Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Mehdi, real pleasure to have you. As I said the last time you were on, I've been a big fan of yours. That has only grown since that time. Really have enjoyed your work. And you're one of the few people who will talk about Palestinians on.
That's what I was going to say. It was so good you did that on primetime. Like
yes.
That, right. I mean, to have that message out there.
Really on national television. I want to get to Israel. We had planned to talk about that. Hopefully we'll get there. A little bit of news last night, though.
Was that?
Yeah. I don't know if you saw that on Twitter. What? And in fact, you know what I was thinking? Well, maybe we'll do this in a bit where I will debate you on whether we should indict Donald Trump using what I will project as right-wing talking points. But before we get there, what's your sense of all this? I mean, there's so many different ways and lenses in which to sort of look at this. But what was your first, your first reactions?
My first reaction was a historic one. The first thing I tweeted about it, I think yesterday, I'm not historic in the sense that this is the first former president to ever be indicted. Not that historic one, because that's what we're obsessing over. For me, the historic, as someone who's followed Donald Trump for nearly a decade and has obviously followed his life ever since I started following him, it was fascinating that 1973 October, he appears on the front page of the New York Times with his father for denying black tenants places in their buildings. The Nixon DOJ brings a case against him. He was too racist even for Richard Nixon. And they settle out of court. And that is the beginning. That's the first time we hear of Donald Trump. And it's the first quote unquote crime he gets away with. And 50 years. It's taken 50 years to indict this guy. So for me, that was my instant reaction. As someone who's very skeptical that we will ever see Donald Trump behind bars, as someone who knows very well that the American legal system is all about impunity for the rich and powerful. I've been one of those saying, well, hold your horses. I was one of those who said, during Mueller, calm down, guys. The walls are not closing in. It's not the end of Donald Trump. Every time we were told it was the end of Donald Trump. And even now, I don't think it's the end of Donald Trump. But I am pleasantly surprised to see that the man is finally being held to some account. This indictment, whether he gets off in the end, doesn't matter. The indictment itself is historic. As I say, not just because former president, but because Donald Trump is actually being held. Teflon Trump is actually being held to account.
I have some theories, and maybe this is more like we meet at a bar and we talk about these. But what is your theory about that? I mean, this is a guy that ran into troubles with the gaming commissions down in New Jersey. There's all sorts of weird stuff going on with Felix Seder and money laundering. There was weird stuff coming out of the New York FBI office back in the run up to the 2016 election. And even Bragg himself, when he first came in, sort of dismissed these more sort of like substantive charges around money. And so much so that a couple of his, I think like his former prosecutors basically said, this is wrong. There's a case there. What do you think accounts for the fact that this is the first time he's ever been indicted when, I mean, this guy's a good target. If you're a ambitious AG or district attorney, this is the type of guy you would go after.
It is a great question because he's not just your bog standard billionaire, if we can call people. He is, as you say, in many ways, he stood out as the kind of garish, controversial, egomaniacal, attention-seeking. My favorite headline last night was star of Home Alone 2 indicted. Right. Like, this is the guy who was in movies. He's on TV shows. He was demanding to be part of the conversation for so long. In the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, prior to even running for president. So yes, it is a great question in a place like New York, where so many people went down in the property business for, as you say, crimes like money laundering, mafia connections. It is amazing that he was untouched by an actual courtroom for so many decades. I mean, he's the master of settling out of court. He's the master of, We laugh about Trump being this person who's hated by the majority of the country today. He's seen as this kind of extreme, and he is. But we forget that for many years, he was well established within the mainstream. You've seen that picture with him and the Clintons and who is it, Bloomberg or whatever it is on the. We've seen the pictures of all of them together. He was very much part of. He played all sides in terms of the Democrats or Republicans, and that's how a lot of rich and powerful people do get away with stuff in this country. Is that they play all sides, they donate to both sides, they attend both sides' weddings. They stay in with the people in power, and it leads to a situation in America. The great irony is Trump gets elected because people are angry that the system allows people like Trump to get away with stuff. It's a great paradox of Trumpism, is that the legitimate anger against the establishment that's out there amongst people on the left and right was exploited by a guy who's benefited from a system that's allowed him to declare bankruptcies when he wasn't really bankrupt and dodge crimes that other people couldn't dodge. I mean, just one quick one that really bothers me: obstruction of justice. Robert Mueller didn't get him, quote unquote, on Russia, but he did lay out in part 2 of the Mueller report 10 clear cases of obstruction of justice. Merrick Garland investigated 0 of them.
Right.
None. Not a one. That bothers me.
Well, it's also, I mean, he used his kind of connections to his benefit in 2016 when he was going out into rallies and essentially saying, all of these politicians are corrupt. You know why I know? Because I'm the one that's buying them. And the fact that had salience, I mean, it is so warped and twisted, as you say. But I guess that brings me to my next question. In the Republican base that Trump has cultivated, which is the Trump cult at this point, does this help him or hurt him? Because there's no constitutional provision that prevents him from running. I mean, Eugene Debs ran from prison, so he could still run.
UK where you can't run from prison. So
exactly. So I mean,
people keep saying, "Can he run if he's indicted?" And I tell them he can run from prison. Forget running while indicted.
Right. So what's your sense of how this affects the political moment right now?
The base doesn't know what to think. I think they're making it up as they go along. Let's take Exhibit A, Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just a short while ago, she was like, no need to protest. This is not a big deal. This is all BS. Today, she's tweeting, we need to protest. I'll be there on Tuesday. So I think they're making it up as they go along. They're not sure, like all of us, none of us know how this is going to play out. So I don't think whether you're a critic of Trump or a supporter of Trump, you don't know how it's going to play out. What I would say for sure is, and I think Amanda Carpenter, the Never Trump Republican, made this point on Twitter this week, which was, show me the Trump Biden voter who says I'm going back to Trump based on what's happened. That person doesn't exist. The idea that swing voters or independents are saying, this makes me want to vote for Trump, I think that's nonsense. So people he needs to win in a general election. I mean, we obsess over the Trump base for obvious reasons, but the people he needs to win in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, the places where Biden beat him in 2020, I don't see how those people say, this makes me want to vote for Trump. And of course, to quote Churchill, this is not the beginning of the end. It's the end of the beginning. It's not even the end of the beginning. I forgot the quote now. But the idea is there's many more stuff to come, right? We know that there's much, people keep saying, why was this the first case? What about Fani Willis in Georgia? What about Jack Smith and his 2 cases? Well, there's still to come, and historians will argue over whether the order mattered. I don't know if the order matters.
Well, we'll find out. I think that's a question you answer, right, like you say, in retrospect. And I'm with you in terms of the general election. I think, frankly, the election for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court that's happening on Tuesday, probably far more important for the general election, I think, in the final analysis. But in the primary, this is the interesting dynamic that's going on here, is that is what, in a weird, and I hate to play this kind of horse race, but let's play it out. Right.
What fascinates me is that the indictment could help Trump with his base, to go back to Emma's question, and help him defeat DeSantis, because that's what we've seen over the last 2 weeks. His poll numbers have gone up, not down, with Republicans. DeSantis is actually not winning. And of course, when every one of your rivals comes out and defends you when you get indicted, that can only help you in a primary race. In a normal world, if a Democrat was running for office and got indicted, the other Democrats would say, hey, that person shouldn't be the candidate. But in the Republican Party, DeSantis comes out and says, I'll protect you if you don't want to go to New York, as he did last night. So that can only help him in a primary. But then the same indictment doesn't help him in the general. So, the Democrats played this dangerous game, I'm sure you all remember well, in 2015, which was, he's the Pied Piper, he's the candidate we want. And I think that wasn't the case, obviously, in 2016, because he won. But in 2024, there's a weird, dark version of that where I'm sure some Democrat strategists, some Biden people are thinking, is the best case scenario, if not for the country, then for the Biden candidacy, is for Trump to win the primary big and then lose the general.
Right. And I would imagine that part of there's an awareness, at least in broader Republican circles, that maybe we don't want to be talking about him paying off, paramours. And we should say, we don't really know what the scope of these charges are. What was really interesting is that there was a story in the Wall Street Journal, I guess it was yesterday, that they brought in that guy, was it David Pecker, who was the owner of the National Enquirer or whatever, the parent company of that, because people forget there's a second woman that he paid off.
Yeah.
And
Karen McDougal.
McDougal. And now you're starting to run into like a pattern of lying about these payments. I mean, John Edwards got off of charges very similar to this. He was brought to trial. People forget that he sort of solicited, donors to pay off. But your reaction to that, because we really don't know,
the Edwards
right?
case is raised a lot, and Edwards did get off by saying, look, the money was to avoid me being embarrassed with my family. It wasn't about trying to win an election. Therefore, it wasn't campaign finance. It wasn't election interference, etc. I get that. Here's what I'd say. I'm not a lawyer. I mean, half the people having these discussions are not lawyers. And I would say Alvin Bragg, I'm guessing, knows about the John Edwards case. And so when we always try and preempt and say, what about this? What about that? I'm sure he and his team have played that game too. And I would suspect Alvin Bragg probably doesn't want to lose in court because that's what he'll be remembered for history. Yeah. And his own party will hate him. So I suspect he's not bringing this case unless he thinks he can win. I'm not a prosecutor, but I would guess that's the calculation they're making before they go to court in the most controversial case in American legal history. So I would assume that he's gamed this out. He's worked out the differences between this and John Edwards. He's got what witnesses he needs. That's not just Michael Cohen. And, again, I'm not a lawyer. It'd be interesting to see how this play out. Maybe Trump gets off. In which case, fine. That's how the American justice system is supposed to work. I'm fascinated by all these Republicans who basically have two talking points, just two. Number one, if they can come for Trump, they'll come for you. Yes, that's how it's supposed to work. And number two, it's all Soros and the Jews, which is actually really, really dangerous and depressing. And I really worry about, God help us in the coming days if there's a repeat of 2018.
Well, I mean, Soros has not been investing too heavily in Georgian politicians and prosecutors, and your thoughts about, like, if I could sequence this out, I would have had the Georgia indictments first, just because they're of like.
So would I, but that's not how it works, right?
Of course, and just more proof that I, as a Jew, am not controlling at least this the sequence.
Sam, on that note, did you see my favorite tweet? I got to share it. I don't know if you all saw the tweet. Is a tweet of the Israeli protests earlier this week, and someone tweeted, "How come the far right are not blaming the Jews for these protests? Finally, we're behind some protests."
Right, exactly, exactly.
Right. They were flying the Confederate flag there, coincidentally, I saw. But anyway.
Well, the Soros thing is actually deeply dangerous. We know it leads to real-world violence. We know about what happened at Tree of Life in 2018. We know about Cesar Sayok and his pipe bomb to Soros's house. And the worst part of all of it is none of it's true. It's not even based on some true story. They gave money to Bragg, and then they took that money and extrapolated into conspiracy. He literally gave zero money. We did the segment on my show. George Soros has never given a penny to Alvin Bragg. He's never met Alvin Bragg. He's never spoken to Alvin Bragg. He's never texted Alvin Bragg. He's never emailed Alvin Bragg. He's never had a Zoom call with Alvin Bragg. He gave money to a PAC called Color of Change, which also never gave any money to Alvin Bragg. They did their own independent spending promoting Bragg's candidacy. So no money has ever changed hands between George Soros and Alvin Bragg, not directly, not indirectly. And yet Ron DeSantis, the possible next president of the United States, came out yesterday and not once but twice says this is Soros. Fox hosted Matt Gaetz, who said this is the Sorosification of the justice system, which just a few years ago would have put you outside of mainstream Republican politics, which just a few years ago got Kevin McCarthy in trouble when he called out Soros and Steyer and Bloomberg. But now it's just completely mainstream, and it's really, really scary.
And they're trying to do double dip with it too by calling Alvin Bragg an animal. That's what he's calling him, and a thug. We just read one of his Truth Social posts.
The mastery of Trump that Trump has over racism. People say Trump's useless at everything. He's a master of racism. The fact that he can find an attack to defend himself, which is both anti-black and anti-Jewish at the same time, is true white supremacist genius. That he's able to say, "Hey, it's the evil rich Jew pulling the strings with the violent, dumb black man who he's manipulating." It's sick on every level. And the fact that a former president is saying this and the de facto leader of one of our two major parties is a reminder that one of our two major parties is now pretty much full-on white supremacist in many ways.
We should say that formulation of the Jews pulling the strings is essentially the white supremacists. It's practically in the handbook on how you respond to if blacks are inferior to you, then why are you afraid of them, beating you? It's because they're being manipulated by the Jews who are pulling the strings.
Don't forget, in 2018, when Soros was blamed for the migrant caravan, do you remember that? That was also Jews are bringing brown and black people into this country. The brown and black people are not doing it on their own. It's Jews, and we know the Tree of Life shooter famously blamed the Hebrew Immigration Society before he set out for the synagogue. So this stuff is just rancid, it's dishonest, but fundamentally it's dangerous. And I keep banging my head. I'm wondering why more Democrats are not calling this out. More civil society groups are not calling this out. It's happening in plain sight. There was a time when, I used to fight against Islamophobia. I spent 15 years in public life trying to push back against Islamophobia. And one of the things I always did, and a lot of Muslims do, is say, hey, you never say that about Jews, what you say about Muslims. I can't even say that anymore. Because now anti-Semitism has been so revived that Muslims and Jews are equally demonized and smeared by the right. And it's really, really scary.
Let's play that clip from Laura Ingraham so people can take a look. Now, Laura Ingraham, let's say, we should say, longtime racist. I mean, she's been at this for a long time, back from her days in Dartmouth.
She's a vet.
Full-on vet. But here she is with Matt Gaetz.
Faced unfair persecution yourself by our powers that be in our justice system. But Bragg just indicted a former president for the first time in our history, and yet they don't have to tell the American public right now why for a few days, just to keep the drama going, I guess. Your reaction to just that aspect of it before we get into more?
It seems to leave a nation on the edge as we witness the Sorosification of the criminal justice system in this country. Remember, Soros gave Alvin Bragg $1 million, and we're used to seeing these things with political leaders arrested, grandmothers hijacked in our city centers, government printing money till it goes out of style in third world countries, and now that's being visited on the United States of America.
There's a lot of lies in that one clip.
Well,
I mean, first off,
you mentioned Ingram's history of racism. What about Ingram's history as a lawyer? She knows full well why this indictment is sealed and why it hasn't been revealed.
Well, exactly.
This is as we know from the Dominion text. The worst part of Fox's coverage is that they're not true believers. I'd have more respect for them if they were true believers. It's that they cynically manipulate their viewers, lie to them, make fools of them. I've said this 100 times before, I'll say it 100 times again. No one has more contempt for conservative voters in this country than conservative politicians and pundits, right? They treat them like fools, they lie to them, and now we know they laugh at them behind the scenes on text. But she knows why it's a sealed indictment until whatever it is, Monday, Tuesday. And yeah, Matt Gaetz is lying when he says Alvin Bragg got $1 million from Soros. 100% untrue. That is just a complete lie.
And we should just say Bragg wanted Trump in, I guess, last night to turn himself in, and they negotiated Tuesday, but it would be incredibly unfair to Trump to release that indictment. I mean, it's just not the way you do it. It is impressive in that respect. But Georgia, what is your sense? I know the Georgia legislature, I heard some rumblings. There was an attempt to essentially, more or less, I guess, pull a Bibi Netanyahu, where they would somehow have a legislative ability to sort of keep the prosecutors from pursuing the law in some fashion. But what is your sense about how much will this impact that from a like a narrative standpoint? Is it because I do think
it's a good question, because on the one hand, to go back to the whole liberals kind of gnashing and wailing, why is this the first case? And I include myself on those people who've said, oh, if only this wasn't the first case. On the other hand, again, none of us know how it's all going to play out. But you could argue that the fact that the charges get progressively more serious make the Trump defenses look weaker and weaker. They're going to come out and throw the kitchen sink at Soros and Democrats and third world countries over this. What are they going to do when it starts to get more serious? And it starts to become much clearer. I mean, those cases for me are much more slam dunk than this one. I mean, the Georgia case, I often, whenever I talk about legal issues, I say, I'm not a lawyer, right? I said it at the beginning of the show, I'm not a lawyer. However, asterisk, I don't need to be a lawyer for the Georgia case because I have 2 ears and I heard the phone call. Every single person can hear the phone call for themselves. Donald Trump committed that crime on tape. We all heard him do it. There's literally no dispute about it. And I've asked multiple prosecutors on my show, if Donald Trump was not Donald Trump, if you and I had made that phone call to Brad Raffensperger, would we be indicted by now? And every single one of them said, yes, of course. It would never.
I think we would all be in jail at this point.
It would never have taken 2 years, 2 months since that phone call happened.
He also, that wasn't the only call, too.
Now we know there were other calls to the legislature, yes.
Right, exactly. So,
and just by the way, on the Georgia legislature interfering and on Jim Jordan and the Congress trying to interfere, again, the same people screaming about the politicization of justice in this country are breaking every norm that we have, that Congress doesn't get involved, that legislatures don't get involved in judicial matters, that there are separation of powers at the state level and the federal level. Remember, with the Republican Party, it's always projection. Every accusation is a confession, right? Every time. So when they say this is a third world country and you're politicizing justice, it's their behavior that fulfills that description. A lawless former president in exile threatening people who are trying to hold him to account and suggesting that he should be allowed to commit crimes willy-nilly, and a party behind him that says we're going to break down the wall between legislature and judiciary in order to help that former president. That is quote unquote, and let's not forget third world countries in itself, a racist nativist reference from Gates and Co. That is what really happens in non-democracies.
All right. Now, you recently written a book, Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. It is sitting by my bedside right now. Because what's that? No. I read it to my child.
Good.
I read it to my child every day.
Harry Potter than that.
Equipping your child with some real skills there.
Let's see how you do. We're going to have our own little. First, let's play this clip from Tucker Carlson, who makes a point that we'll let Tucker Carlson say and hear how you respond to Tucker Carlson.
So the rule of law appears to be suspended tonight, not just for Trump, but for anyone who would consider voting for him. Democrats can attack police officers and seize control of the Tennessee State House. They did that today, and no one's going to go to jail. Trans Biden voters can execute Christian children, and the Biden White House will explain that actually the trans community, the transgenderists, are the real victim. This is what it seems to be. It's a political purge. And confronted with it, the real Quislings here, who are the Republican leaders in Washington, are naturally calling for a surrender. Asa Hutchinson is saying that Donald Trump needs to withdraw now because Alvin Bragg doesn't like him. So one of the reasons that Trump won in the first place in 2016 is because people like Asa Hutchinson, people who have no interest in winning or governing, and least of all in representing their actual voters or their interests, people like that have been in charge of the Republican Party for generations now, and its voters are sick of it. And if those people continue to run the Republican Party much longer, that party will no longer exist within a few years. There'll be no reason to have it. What you're seeing now is lawlessness, and the question is who can stop it.
So is this a suspension of law, not just for Trump, but also for the people who voted for him? And can we all just agree that Asa Hutchinson really dictated the Republican Party before Trump came on the scene?
The most powerful man in Republican politics, Asa Hutchinson. I mean, to that bit of demagoguery from Carlson, I mean, you can't really, there's not really an argument in there. It's just demagoguery, right? The trans line is gratuitously offensive and untrue. My favorite part was the end when he said, lawlessness and violence. And I'm like, well, hold on, aren't you the guy who put out video of the January 6th insurrection saying these are tourists just recently? Now you're concerned about police at the Tennessee State House, apparently, but not the Capitol Police. Look, fundamentally, I would say two things. Number one, go back to what I said earlier. No, this is about the rule of law. This is about everyone being held equally to the law. And I'm not going to take lectures about politicians being targeted from the party of lock her up. Like, this is a party that spent several years saying lock her up, lock up Fauci, lock him up. And now they're very bothered by a legal process by which their boss might be locked up. And of course, with Tucker Carlson, there's only one response to make to Tucker Carlson. I'll only make one response for the rest of my life to Tucker Carlson, which is, you hate Trump more than I do.
Exactly.
Right?
You call him a demonic force.
I've never called him a demonic force. I've never compared Trump to Satan. You hate Trump more than I do. Why do you hate Trump more than I do?
I mean, it's just also the covering of his ass now on a nightly freaking basis.
I love Trump.
It is insufferable. I cannot believe that we're going to have to sit through this, because he's going to have to be
overcompensate.
As long as Trump's in the public eye, he'll be overcompensating for the rest of time.
It also feels like at the end there, he is sort of shopping around for a strong man, right? It's like he's talking about the suspension of law. The law has been suspended. Now, who is the person who's going to do something about it?
Let's not forget, Tucker Carlson is America's most influential mainstreamer of Viktor Orban, right?
Exactly.
He's the guy who went to Hungary and did a show there for a week. He's the guy who made Viktor Orban acceptable and agreeable to the Republican base in a way that no other person has. And I would say, as excited as we're getting about Alvin Bragg and Donald Trump, for me, the most important possible trial of this year is not Gwyneth Paltrow, is not Donald Trump. It is actually Fox Dominion.
Mm-hmm.
Without a doubt, that is the most exciting one. We should also say, to be fair, that Tucker Carlson's dad, to be fair, is Richard Carlson, is a lobbyist, and their lobby outfit lobbies for Orban. So, it's not just Tucker out there.
I can't believe that, Sam. What you're trying to suggest there might be conflicts of interest with people who work at Fox.
I don't know. That seems to be their interests are very much aligned, but maybe in terms of like what he's doing on camera. All right, let's go to the next argument. This one, this is actually an argument. Would you put up Matt Taibbi, my old friend, Matt Taibbi's tweet? His theory is, we'll read it off. If presidents think they'll be chased into jail under thin pretexts as ex-presidents, they'll try even harder never to leave office. This is how autocracies are born. So what about the argument that we shouldn't, we shouldn't, good, but go ahead.
So you're being unfair, Sam, because Matt's actually coming on my show next week. So you're forcing me to preempt some of the things.
I didn't realize that. All right. Well,
yeah, Matt didn't like the fact that I've been mocking him on Twitter about his inability to criticize Musk. And he said, why don't you invite me on your show? And then all his followers said, oh, you're a coward. You'll never invite me. He'll never invite you on his show. I invited him on my show. So now they're shifting goalposts saying, you won't let him speak. But he's coming on. I appreciate Matt. I used to be a massive fan of Matt Taibbi. Matt knows that. I spent much of the 2000s reading his stuff and loving his stuff. He and I have now very different views of the world. But we're going to debate that on the show next week on my Peacock show on Thursday. But just on that tweet, I would say three things. In my book, I say you should always have three arguments. Rule of three. I would say three things very quickly. Number one, thin pretext. How do you know? Have you seen the indictment? Because I haven't. Number two, this will make presidents not leave office. Have you heard something called January the 6th? I can tell you all about it. And number three, this is how autocracies are born. Really? This is how autocracies are born? Not, for example, the governor of Florida banning books and arresting black people who are trying to vote, which Matt really has not said anything about in recent months or years. So I would say those three things, when I read that tweet, those are the three things that jump out at me. It's the idea that there's a thin pretext none of us know. Donald Trump is already trying not to leave office. So that ship already sailed. And autocracy is coming from the Republican Party. Anyone with an eyes and two ears knows that the biggest threat to our democracy in this country is a radicalized Republican Party that's taking inspiration from the Viktor Orbans of this world and wants to tear down representative democracy. Only interested in minority rule.
And I will add one more thing here. I just love that in the past, he has made this claim that Twitter being censorious and working with the Biden campaign, taking down Hunter Biden's dick pics that were taken from his laptop and links to those photos on Twitter. It could have changed the trajectory of the 2020 election. Suppressing that information was
suppressing Stormy Daniels.
Right, but the 2016, but the hush money payments for the right before the election in 2016 made right after the Hollywood Access tapes, by the way, which was the sequencing of that is very important to understand. Hey, that's just a thin pretext. We should discard that. Yeah.
Maybe I'll raise it with Matt next week.
I am looking forward to seeing that deployed.
I appreciate that Matt Taibbi is coming on the show because there's much to discuss, and I think he'll be surprised to see that we hopefully have a good faith debate.
I find it hard to believe you'll turn this sound on. That's for one. That's why I'm tuning in to see if you actually allow his microphone to work. I'm a little dubious, but we'll see.
I'm not Bill O'Reilly. Isn't that what Bill O'Reilly used to do?
He did do a little bit of that. He definitely cut him off. All right, I have an argument now. This is it. I learned from you. You got to do it in threes. Did not the Manhattan District Attorney's Office say that there would be no decision this week from the grand jury? Didn't they issue that statement just a day or two ago?
I don't know. I thought they said they were going on holiday. There was a debate about whether the grand jury would be around.
Right. They're going on holiday. But then they come out with a decision. Didn't they lie? How can we trust anything they say?
That's weak stuff, Sam.
What are you saying?
Even for your pretend right-wing talking point. I mean, what I find fascinating, one thing I would say is I'm glad you raised that issue, Sam, because it enables me to remind everyone that it was a grand jury. It was a grand jury that Donald Trump on Wednesday night was praising on Truth Social. I don't know if any of you saw Trump's post where he said, I have great faith in the grand jury system and grand juries who look at him. I mean, that great irony of pinning this all on Bragg and by extension Soros and by extension the Democratic Party and by extension the deep state is that actually Alvin Bragg didn't make, Alvin Bragg's not the person who voted, right? That's the whole system in this country. Whatever you think about juries and grand juries, it was a bunch of people in Donald Trump's home city who voted to say, you know what, on the strength of the evidence we've heard, including witnesses from Trump's side, we think crimes were committed. I mean, we don't know how many, more than one, certainly, and we will see when that sealed indictment is opened. It'll be very interesting to see what they're actually going to go after him specifically on. As I say, I just want to keep adding this caveat. The grand jury may be wrong, Alvin Bragg may be wrong, and Donald Trump may win in court, may have his days innocent until proven guilty. Fine with me. Again, it's every accusation is a confession. I'm not the person who believes in using the justice system as a political weapon. Fine. If he gets off after a fair trial, good for him. That's, you know, I am not somebody who believes that the justice system should be used to shut him down. I believe he lost a free and fair election in November 2020, and that should have been the end of it. In any normal political world, he would have gone off to give speeches or write or paint paintings like George W. Bush or make Netflix shows like Barack Obama. But no, he refused to accept the result, incited an armed insurrection, and decided to run again.
I wouldn't mind if Alvin Bragg was able to do this with George Bush. I'm just saying. I'm just putting that.
I'm
out
on
there.
record. In fact, I had Tom Nichols, the Atlantic writer, on my show this week. If anyone wants to watch, we had a very long debate. It's on YouTube about whether George Bush should be prosecuted for war crimes in Iraq. If Vladimir Putin can be in Ukraine, why not George W. Bush in Iraq?
Couldn't agree more on that. And let's just, I know we got to get you out of here in just a minute, but what was going on in Israel at the beginning of this week, it is, and we've had a couple of interviews on this. I'm curious as to your thoughts because it really is just fascinating to see what's been going on there. Fascinating both in terms of like it's unprecedented the amount of like sort of protest that's going on within the context of that country. It's also fascinating in this sort of like this inability for the body politic that is protesting against the anti-democratic moves of Bibi Netanyahu to see the massive anti-democratic sort of like elephant that has been sitting, you know, that is almost the room essentially for decades now.
Yes, and Michael Svard, the Israeli human rights lawyer who came on my Sunday show last week, made that point that we are protesting just a few miles away from people we are controlling and don't have any democracy. And the point I made on MSNBC on Monday night when I was sitting in for Chris Hayes was, if you want to have real democracy in Israel, you need to have freedom for the Palestinians. You can't have a real democracy that controls the lives of several million people who don't have a right to vote, who don't have a right to choose their government, who do live under dictatorship. A prominent Israeli journalist texted me last week saying, I hope you're covering the story. It's crazy what's happening here. We're turning into a dictatorship. I said, yes, I'm glad you're all protesting. But of course, for Palestinians, it's always been a dictatorship.
Right.
And he said, yes, after a pause. So I hope more people are realizing this, probably not enough. What I would say is, look, we can't control Israel. I know that Netanyahu's son believes that the American government is behind all the protests. I love the conspiracy theory. But we can't control what's happening in Israel fully. What we can control is what's happening in our country. And one thing I would say is, for a long time, people have tried, I wrote a book called Win Every Argument. How do you frame the best argument? How do you come up with the best narrative? And I do believe that we've tried so many arguments, those of us who believe in Palestinian rights, who are critics of Israel's occupation, international law, human rights reports, trying to humanize Palestinians. We've tried every single method people have, and it hasn't really worked, not on Congress for sure. But what I would say is, now is the time to lean into the supporters of Israel's argument, because for years we were told by supporters of Israel, the reason we back Israel is not because of military-industrial complex, not because we're fighting Iran, it's not because of AIPAC, it's not because of any of those conspiracies, it's because of shared values. Shared values. Okay, then. I'm all for that. What shared values do we have with Itamar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, and Benjamin Netanyahu? Please tell me, Democratic senators, please tell me, Democratic members of Congress, because if Democrats are going to say we're facing semi-fascism at home, Marjorie Taylor Greene is outrageous and beyond the pale. I mean, Itamar Ben-Gvir makes Marjorie Taylor Greene look like a communist, lefty, sandal-wearing peacenik. I mean, this is what people in America need to understand now. The Israeli government is so out there. No Democratic official, forget the Republican body, but no Democratic body official who claims to believe in any kind of progressive values. And we've always talked about PEP, Progressive Except Palestine. A lot of very, very liberal politicians in America, that's the blind spot. They're fine with the oppression of the Palestinians. Well, forget the Palestinians for a moment. Look what's happening in Israel proper. And clearly, to be fair, even Joe Biden, best friend of Benjamin Netanyahu, old friend of Netanyahu, came out this week and said, hold on. So the Israeli right is its own worst enemy. And I believe that those who support Palestinian rights and support Israeli democracy in America should be making that point, which is, we are Israel's ally. But on what basis is that alliance? Clearly, it's not shared values right now.
Well, I mean, I'm fearful, though, that framing these protests as pro-democracy protests is not taking the big picture into account. Because, yes, Benjamin Netanyahu is attempting to overhaul the judiciary and politicize it greatly. But beforehand, the judiciary and the Israeli Supreme Court has been instrumental in negating Palestinians' home rights and allowing writ large Israeli settlers to take them, for them to be bulldozed for military.
I don't dispute that. What I would just say from a narrative point of view is, if you have Israelis arguing for democracy, now you can say, well, that democracy never really existed, certainly not for Palestinians. But it is a moment to say, okay, what kind of democracy? And I think Palestinians who haven't turned up at protests are making that point, that, okay, what kind of democracy is this going to look like once we're done and finished? It can't be what was there before. It can't. And I think there's shades of that here in the US, where we say we're against Trump and we're against the fascism of the GOP and we want democracy in America. And I've been saying for several years, yes, we should be pushing back against the big lie, and we should be pushing back against Republican attempts to gerrymander and set up secretaries of state who are election done. But then we also need to have a wider conversation about American democracy wasn't so great before Trump.
Right.
I mean, the Electoral College needs to go, regardless of whether Donald J. Trump abuses it with fake electors. It just needs to go. So I do think you could use conversations that are going on right now without accepting all the premises, Emma, you're right, but to use it to further a broader agenda. I just think from a narrative point of view, that's a useful thing to do.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. And the way I think we see that at least in Israel, the way that process starts is maybe adopting a constitution that sort of codifies the idea of equality, and then hopefully
they've resisted doing year after year. The Israeli Knesset does not allow a bill that Palestinian politicians put forward that says this should be a state of all its citizens. That very simple liberal line gets rejected every year. They're not even allowed to debate it.
Well, I guess hope springs eternal, but we'll see. And folks, make sure you pick up Win Every Argument, The Art of Debating, Persuading, and Public Speaking. Great tips for basically all the information that you hear on shows like Mehdi's or ours. The way that you put this to use is by learning the sort of the format and the tactics and just the skills that Mehdi lays out and does so well on his program. I can't wait to see that Taibbi episode. Really appreciate you coming on, Mehdi. Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.